Senator, good to have you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on this, let's say, just odd day. We have the impeachment sort of laid out in the House, and a trade deal suddenly scored within hours with Mexico and Canada. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the articles being abuse of power, when I look at the proceedings, I see it, I guess, in a much different light. I see a great deal of abuse of power from someone like Adam Schiff, who uses subpoena power to gather phone records of a journalist and phone records of a fellow congressman. That, to me, smacks of abuse of power. And so I think it's in the eye of the beholder, and it looks very, very partisan in the sense that there is no crossover, there is no significant Republican. In fact, I don't think there's going to be any Republican support in the House or the Senate for this impeachment.
So in the Senate, you include that. If it gets to a trial in the Senate, you don't see any Republicans supporting impeaching the president?
I think it's unlikely. And think about it this way. They're arguing that he damaged national security by withholding foreign aid. Well, there are people like me and the president, frankly, who have argued that philosophically foreign aid doesn't make us stronger. It makes us further in debt and actually makes us weaker. So that's a political argument. You can disagree with me, but you can't impeach the president because he doubts that foreign aid is actually good for us and he thinks the Europeans ought to pay more. That's a position. We run elections on that, but making impeachment about the president's position on foreign aid, I think, is a big mistake. And I think the Democrats actually will live to regret this because a lot of people are seeing this as very partisan exercise and not really something that they're very serious about.
Senator, you're right to say in lockstep Republicans are with the president, Democrats equally in lockstep with trying to impeach the president. Not all of them, but I'm wondering, that being the case, you don't see any impeachable offenses here. Are you embarrassed by any of this or the president's behavior, tone, or any of that?
I guess I'm more embarrassed by the process that the Democrats are criminalizing the presidency, that the Democrats have chosen to try to overturn an election. This doesn't bode well for our country. They say in such serious tones that this threatens democracy. Well, what really threatens democracy is that if we're going to impeach every president that comes along because we don't like their tone or we don't like their demeanor or we think they're not courteous. So I think these are things that should be taken care of at the ballot box. I really, the things I'm concerned about are people like Adam Schiff using subpoena power to actually get the phone records of a fellow congressman. I think that's obscene, and I think really he ought to be censured for it.
Senator, if you were president, if you had come through the process and been nominated and become president, would you have made a call like that, even though it's not, to your point, an impeachable offense? Was it the proper thing to do?
I would say the difference is I wouldn't offer foreign aid at all to Ukraine because we don't have the money. We got to borrow it from China to send it to Ukraine. So I wouldn't have negotiated over it. But I will tell you that the law actually says to the president that he can only release the foreign aid if they're showing progress on corruption. But I would point out, since I'm not a big fan of foreign aid, that there have been many studies done on this that show that more money goes to corrupt nations and it doesn't really fix corruption. So I don't think foreign aid works, nor do I think it's the business of the federal government, the U.S. government, to borrow money to send it to foreign countries. I think it doesn't work, and it's foolhardy.
Do you think that the foreign aid wasn't the issue as much as trying to get some dirt on an opponent or someone who could challenge in the next election? That take away whether that it's a high crime and misdemeanor, to your point, it hurt the president's image, it hurt our country's image. What do you think?
Maybe, but I guess you could look at it from another perspective and say Hillary Clinton hired a spy, a British spy, to try to interfere in our election. Was that sort of equally wrong? Should she have been put in jail for doing that? Is it illegal to hire foreigners? Actually, it is. In this case, you could say he's going after corruption, and the corruption just happens to be someone who also is a political opponent. But if we were to write the rules that say you can go after corruption unless they're involved in politics, that'd be sort of weird laws. That'd be like telling the local Republican sheriff, you're allowed to go after crime unless it happens to be your opponent's son that committed the crime. So, I mean, it would be an absurdity to say that we were going to exempt political people from investigations of corruption.
Well, that's a clever way of playing that, but let me switch gears if I can, Senator. As you know, there is the release of all of this information and emails and letters and interviews from those who say that over the past roughly 2 decades, when the Afghanistan war began, it was almost like another Vietnam, and people on the inside knew about it. Now, to your credit, you were warning a lot about good money going after bad and are getting bogged down in that region of the world. Are you surprised by any of these revelations that have continued now through 3 presidents?
Well, I think it's disturbing, and I think it's also an insult to the service, of our young men and women. They're brave enough to volunteer. They go to fight for their country. There needs to be a clear-cut mission. There needs to be a constitutional debate. We can't go 19 years without re-debating whether we're supposed to be in the war. So we're going to bring up the Afghan papers. I've already made communication with the Inspector General. We're going to ask him to appear in January in my committee. We're also going to bring in the folks who had these comments, because it's not just about whether they were secretly thinking this. It's about whether we should still be there now. I just can't believe we'd send another young person to their death over there.
Well, Liz Cheney has advocated, on our network, that maybe if we did have more key people on the ground, and that this would not have been the case. I want you to react to this. Liz Cheney.
It's crucially important that we don't walk away. We know what happens when we walk away. We're now in a situation where we've got the sufficient number of troops on the ground to prevent safe havens. And people have got to remember that Afghanistan is a place from which the terrorists planned and plotted and trained and attacked us on 9/11. We cannot let that happen again.
Senator, what do you think of that?
I think the Cheneys are unrepentant warmongers. They still won't admit that the Iraq war was a mistake. What they need to realize is that when we topple regimes, when we topple strong men that may not be the best of leaders, what we get is a vacuum and we get more terrorism. So ostensibly, they want to go overseas to fight them over there and to wipe out terrorism. But it turns out we go over there and we end up having chaos when we depose regimes and have no government. And it turns out we get more terrorism. So the Cheneys have been wrong about everything. America needs to quit listening to them. They need to fade into obscurity, and we need to start talking seriously about whether or not we should go to war in Congress, have a full-throated debate. And if the Cheneys want to advocate for staying forever in Afghanistan, I'm very happy to stand up to them and say, no, it's time our boys and young women come home.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you very much.